What if the person you least expect becomes the voice of hope during chaos? Los Angeles was burning, streets filled with smoke and shouts, sirens blaring as unrest swept through the city like wildfire. People barricaded themselves indoors, their faces lit by the eerie glow of fires that refused to die. Headlines flashed non-stop, city in crisis, chaos on the streets, leaders silent. Amidst the turmoil, one silence stood out more than any other, the silence of Elon Musk. The billionaire innovator, the tech visionary who had reshaped the world with electric cars and rockets, had so far said nothing about the city's upheaval. But then, unexpectedly, at the height of the chaos, he broke his silence in a live broadcast that stunned everyone. What did he say? The words echoed not only across Los Angeles but across the nation, shaking the media, igniting conversations, and offering a glimmer of hope in the darkest hour. Before we dive into this story, hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? The unrest in LA didn't start overnight. Months of simmering frustration boiled over into violence, protests, and destruction. Communities that had long felt ignored or oppressed now demanded change. Police stations were vandalized, businesses boarded up, and once bustling neighborhoods were left deserted. The air was thick with fear and anger, but also with a desperate hope for something better. In the midst of this, the public turned to their leaders for guidance, for words that could calm the storm. Yet, day after day, silence prevailed. Elon Musk, with his usual presence in the public eye, was nowhere to be found. Social media exploded with questions. Why was Musk quiet? Was he indifferent? Was he even aware? Then, just when the city seemed ready to tear itself apart, Musk's voice cut through the noise, a message that was neither corporate spin nor a standard PR statement but something raw, honest, and unexpected. It began with a simple question that captured the collective anxiety of the moment: what kind of future do we want to build from the ashes of today? His words were filled with empathy and urgency, calling for unity and innovation, challenging everyone to rethink their role in shaping the future. The impact was immediate. Some hailed him as a visionary stepping up in a crisis, others criticized him for timing or sincerity, but no one could deny that the city listened. What led Musk to speak out? What was the experience behind those words? And how did it change not only Los Angeles but Musk himself? This story unfolds in a city on the brink, revealing a man wrestling with his own doubts and desires to make a difference when it mattered most. It's a tale of struggle, hope, and transformation. As the fires raged outside, inside a quiet room in Musk's home, decisions were being made that would alter the course of a city's future. The following chapters will take you behind the scenes of this historic moment, from Musk's early life and internal battles, to the moments that pushed him toward his bold declaration, and finally, to the aftermath that reshaped more than just headlines. This is not just a story about unrest or a billionaire's speech. It's about the unexpected ways leadership can emerge, how empathy can break through walls of skepticism, and how even the most unlikely voices can become beacons of hope. Stay with me as we explore the journey that started with silence and ended with a voice that refused to be ignored. Where were you when the city shook? What would you do if everything you cared about seemed to crumble? What is the one thing that keeps you going when the world falls apart? Remember, leave a comment below and share your story. This might just be the beginning of something new for all of us. Now, let's start by going back in time, before the unrest, before the speech, to understand the man behind the headlines. Understanding Elon Musk's past, his challenges, and the battles he fought within himself will help you see why this moment was so powerful and surprising. His journey is far from ordinary. It is a path marked by brilliance and failure, loneliness and connection, doubt and fierce determination. And it is this very complexity that made his words in the midst of chaos so resonant and real. This story is not just about a city in turmoil, but about a man finding his voice in the storm. Are you ready to find out how it all began? Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Elon Musk's story begins far from the spotlight of Los Angeles or the boardrooms of Silicon Valley. Born in Pretoria, South Africa, he was a boy who dreamed big in a world that often felt small and limiting. From an early age, Elon showed a restless curiosity and an intense hunger for knowledge. He was a voracious reader, devouring books on everything from science fiction to physics, always searching for something beyond the ordinary. But his childhood was far from easy. He was shy and introverted, often the target of bullying at school. The isolation of being different weighed heavily on him, yet it fueled his inner fire. His parents' difficult divorce and the strained relationships that followed added to his emotional turmoil. Still, Elon's mind remained a refuge, a place where he built worlds, imagined futures, and saw possibilities where others saw obstacles. At age 12, he coded and sold his first video game, showing the early signs of a prodigy with technology and business. But brilliance came with loneliness. The young Musk often felt disconnected from his peers, misunderstood even by family. His father, a complex man himself, was a difficult presence, both a source of tough lessons and emotional distance. Elon's mother was nurturing but stretched thin by the family tensions. These formative years built a foundation of resilience and independence that would carry him through the storms ahead. Moving to Canada as a teenager to attend Queen's University was a major turning point. It was a leap into the unknown, a new continent and culture far from home. The transition was difficult. Financial hardships and cultural shocks tested Elon's resolve, yet he thrived in this new environment, driven by the promise of opportunity. His ambitions only grew. After transferring to the University of Pennsylvania, Elon doubled down on his studies, earning degrees in physics and economics. But even as he excelled academically, he faced the pressures of defining his path in a competitive and rapidly changing world. The tech boom of the 1990s beckoned, and Elon was ready to take the plunge. His first company, Zip2, was born from the idea of helping newspapers go digital. It was a modest start, but it taught Elon invaluable lessons about entrepreneurship, risk, and the harsh realities of business. The sale of Zip2 brought Musk some financial success, but more importantly, it ignited his belief in his ability to change the world through technology. Next came X.com, which eventually became PayPal, revolutionizing online payments. However, the path was far from smooth. Musk faced internal company conflicts, being ousted as CEO, and battling public skepticism. These setbacks hardened his resolve but also revealed a darker side of his journey. Alienation, criticism, and an increasing sense of pressure to succeed. Throughout this period, Musk's personal relationships were complicated. His first marriage to Justine Musk endured the strain of his relentless drive and unconventional lifestyle. The couple shared a deep bond but struggled under the weight of Elon's all-consuming ambitions and the tragedies of losing children early in their marriage. These personal challenges left scars but also deepened Elon's capacity for empathy and understanding of human fragility. Despite the growing fame, Musk remained haunted by self-doubt and an intense fear of failure. This inner conflict pushed him harder, driving innovations like Tesla and SpaceX, ventures that many called impossible but that Musk pursued with single-minded focus. He was not just building companies, he was chasing a vision of the future, a future powered by sustainable energy and space exploration. But the sacrifices were enormous. Countless nights without sleep, strained family ties, and relentless public scrutiny wore on him. The emotional weight of being both a leader and a target sometimes felt unbearable. Yet, these struggles forged a complex character, a man both vulnerable and unyielding, a visionary who could inspire millions but who also wrestled privately with loneliness and fear. His friendships mirrored this complexity. Some close allies admired his relentless optimism and genius, while others found his intensity difficult to handle. Musk's social circles were ever-shifting, often reflecting his evolving priorities and emotional state. Romantic relationships after Justine were brief and intense but often challenged by the demands of his work and public life. All these experiences, the childhood loneliness, the early failures, the personal losses, and the relentless pursuit of impossible goals, shaped Elon Musk into a figure both enigmatic and deeply human. They laid the groundwork for understanding why, when Los Angeles descended into unrest, he carried with him not only a public image of success but also a private reservoir of pain and hope. When the city cried out for leadership, Musk was not just a billionaire speaking from a pedestal, he was a man who had faced his own battles with fear and uncertainty. His empathy, often hidden behind headlines and tweets, was rooted in a lifetime of struggle and survival. This backstory is crucial to grasp the power of what came next, the moment he broke his silence amid the chaos in LA. His words carried weight because they were not just PR but a reflection of someone who understood hardship on a profound level. As we move forward, keep in mind that Elon's journey is not just about technological breakthroughs or financial success. It is a deeply human story of a man grappling with his own demons while trying to light a way forward for others. It is this tension between vulnerability and strength that makes his voice in the unrest so compelling. Next, we will explore Elon's life in the glaring spotlight of fame and the personal costs that fame exacted. How did the pressures of public scrutiny shape his actions during the LA unrest? How did the relationships forged and broken in the glare of fame influence his decision to finally speak out? The journey continues with more surprises and revelations. But before that, remember that Elon's early struggles were not unique, they echo the challenges many face when trying to rise above difficult circumstances. His story invites us all to reflect on how pain and hope can coexist, and how resilience is often born in the hardest moments. Ready to dive deeper? The next chapter awaits. After years of relentless work and bold innovation, Elon Musk's life transformed dramatically as he stepped into the blinding spotlight of global fame. Suddenly, every move he made was scrutinized by millions, from stockholders and fans to critics and the relentless media. Being a household name brought tremendous power, but also immense pressure. Musk's public persona was a complex blend of genius inventor, visionary entrepreneur, and sometimes controversial figure. Behind the scenes, however, the cost of fame was steep. As Tesla surged forward with electric vehicles and SpaceX launched rockets into space, Musk found himself navigating not only technological challenges but the high stakes of public opinion and expectation. Every tweet, interview, and announcement was dissected and debated, amplifying both praise and criticism. This constant spotlight made it harder for Musk to shield the vulnerable parts of himself. The man who once found refuge in books and quiet coding sessions now faced an endless barrage of public judgment. The paradox of fame weighed heavily. He was celebrated for his ambition yet often misunderstood or vilified for his bluntness and unconventional behavior. Personal relationships became increasingly complicated under this glare. Musk's marriage to Tallulah Riley was marked by passionate highs and painful lows, reflecting the difficulties of balancing intense work commitments with intimacy. Their relationship saw breakups and reconciliations, emblematic of Musk's struggle to reconcile his public image with private desires for connection and stability. Friendships in this period were also tested. Some allies admired Musk's boldness and vision, standing by him through controversies, while others distanced themselves, wary of the unpredictable nature of life alongside a man constantly chasing the next frontier. Rivalries formed, especially as Musk's companies disrupted traditional industries. Critics attacked not only his business decisions but his personality, painting him as arrogant or reckless. This fueled a cycle of tension, as Musk often responded with defiance or sarcasm, further polarizing public opinion. The emotional toll of this relentless scrutiny was profound. Musk's social media activity often reflected this inner turmoil, moments of humor and inspiration mixed with frustration and despair. At times, his tweets would spark stock market volatility or media frenzy, blurring the line between personal expression and corporate responsibility. The pressure to constantly perform and innovate left little room for rest or reflection. Musk's intense work ethic led to long nights and relentless days, often at the expense of his health and well-being. There were moments when exhaustion and stress took their toll, yet the drive to push forward never waned. This phase of Musk's life was marked by a growing sense of isolation despite his global fame. The man who sought to connect humanity to Mars sometimes seemed distanced from those around him. Yet, even in this isolation, Musk maintained a vision that kept him moving. Beneath the controversies and headlines was a deep belief in the power of technology to change lives and the future of the planet. It was this conviction that shaped his responses during the unrest in Los Angeles. The public knew him as a business titan, but behind closed doors, he grappled with the loneliness of leadership and the burden of expectations. The unrest in LA was not just a distant headline. It was a reflection of many issues Musk had thought about deeply: inequality, innovation gaps, the role of technology in society. His silence during the initial days of chaos was not indifference but a moment of internal conflict, weighing how best to contribute without inflaming tensions. Musk's life in the spotlight taught him that words could inspire but also divide. He understood the responsibility and risk in speaking out, especially in a city on edge. This background helps explain why his eventual statement was so carefully crafted, balancing honesty with hope. The tensions between his public image and private self played out in this moment of crisis, revealing a man both cautious and courageous. In the months and years leading up to the LA unrest, Musk's public persona had also been shaped by personal losses and breakthroughs. The death of his close friend and confidant to illness brought a rare glimpse of vulnerability to the man often seen as invincible. At the same time, his breakthroughs in Tesla's battery technology and SpaceX's successful launches reinforced his reputation as a relentless innovator. These contradictory experiences, loss and triumph, criticism and praise, formed a backdrop to Musk's evolving character. They influenced not only how he led his companies but how he viewed his role in society. When the unrest erupted, Musk was a man shaped by highs and lows, public adoration and private pain, science and humanity. This duality gave his words a depth that resonated beyond typical celebrity statements. His message was not just about calming a city in chaos, it was a reflection of someone who had lived through conflict, isolation, and the search for meaning. Understanding this helps us see why his silence was so noticeable and why his voice, when it finally emerged, stunned the public. The chapters ahead will explore how Musk navigated the rising conflict in LA, his internal struggles, and the climactic journey that led to his unprecedented intervention. This story is about more than technology or fame, it is about a man confronting his own contradictions to speak truth in a moment of crisis. It is a journey of conflict, hope, and transformation. And it begins here, in the complicated intersection of public life and private struggle. As we continue, keep in mind that leadership is not always about having answers. Sometimes, it's about the courage to speak when silence feels safest. And sometimes, the most unexpected voices can lead the way. The story is far from over. The city is still burning, the unrest still raging, and Musk's role is just beginning to unfold. The unrest in Los Angeles did not fade with time, it grew, spreading like wildfire from neighborhood to neighborhood. The streets became battlegrounds of anger, fear, and desperation. What started as protests demanding justice and reform soon spiraled into violent clashes with law enforcement and widespread destruction. Businesses shuttered their doors, windows boarded up, graffiti and flames marking the city's pain. Emergency responders were overwhelmed, families huddled in their homes, and the city's heartbeat slowed to a tense, uneasy pulse. In this chaos, the public clamored for leadership, for words to make sense of the madness. But silence continued to reign from many quarters, including Elon Musk. This silence wasn't ignorance or indifference. Behind closed doors, Musk was wrestling with an internal storm as fierce as the one raging outside. He felt the pull of responsibility, but also the weight of potential consequences. How could he speak without making things worse? How could he help without being misunderstood? As the city's turmoil worsened, Musk's own conflicts mirrored the chaos outside. On one side was the technologist and entrepreneur, focused on innovation and progress, on building a future beyond Earth and fossil fuels. On the other was the man deeply affected by the social fractures tearing communities apart, the inequalities, systemic failures, and human suffering he saw all around. The dichotomy was painful. Musk's companies had long promised solutions through technology, clean energy, autonomous vehicles, space colonization, but the unrest reminded him that progress was not just about gadgets or rockets. It was about people, their pain and hopes. Musk privately questioned whether technology alone could bridge the growing divides or whether deeper, more human efforts were needed. This internal struggle paralleled the rising conflict in LA. On the streets, moments of despair and destruction were punctuated by acts of hope and solidarity. Strangers shared water and food, community leaders organized peace talks, and local artists painted murals calling for unity. Musk watched these developments with mixed emotions. He was inspired by the resilience but haunted by the scale of the challenge. Meanwhile, the media portrayed Musk's silence as evasiveness or apathy. Social media users criticized him for not taking a stand. Some speculated he was disconnected from the city's reality. These criticisms stung, but Musk was cautious. He knew that hastily spoken words could inflame tensions or be twisted. The stakes were high, the wrong message could deepen divides. Behind the scenes, Musk held conversations with close advisors, community activists, and family members. These discussions helped shape his understanding of the complex issues at play. He learned firsthand about the historical injustices fueling the unrest, the fears of marginalized communities, and the urgent calls for systemic change. This input weighed heavily on him. It was clear that any public statement had to go beyond platitudes or corporate messaging. It needed authenticity, empathy, and a clear call to action. The rising conflict outside also affected Musk personally. Friends and colleagues reached out with their own fears and frustrations. He saw cracks in his professional circle, tensions born of the same societal pressures that sparked the unrest. Musk felt a growing urgency to act, but also a fear of misstepping. His private moments were filled with reflection and doubt. How could he contribute meaningfully? What was his role beyond business? The unrest forced Musk to confront questions he had avoided, about privilege, responsibility, and the limits of technology. At times, the burden felt overwhelming. Yet, in these moments of darkness, he found glimmers of hope. Stories of people coming together, innovative community responses, and the resilience of the human spirit gave him strength. Musk began to envision a path forward that combined technology with empathy and social engagement. He realized that true leadership required listening as much as speaking, humility as much as vision. As the conflict escalated, Musk's internal journey intensified. He moved from silent observation to active engagement behind the scenes. Quietly, he began supporting local initiatives aimed at healing divisions and providing resources to those affected by the unrest. These efforts were mostly private, away from the public eye, reflecting Musk's desire to do good without fanfare. But the growing pressure from the public and media made it clear that silence could no longer be maintained. The tipping point came when a close friend, deeply involved in community work, shared stories of desperate need and heartbreaking loss. This friend challenged Musk directly, "Your words matter, Elon. The city is hurting. It's time to speak." That moment crystallized Musk's resolve. He understood that staying silent was no longer an option. But speaking required courage and careful thought. The rising conflict was now not only external but internal, a battle between fear and hope, caution and action. It was this tension that set the stage for the climactic moment when Elon Musk finally broke his silence. The city's unrest was a crucible, testing not only communities but Musk's character and vision. His decision to speak would carry risks and consequences, but also the possibility of catalyzing change. As we move forward, the story will follow Musk's unexpected journey, his preparations, the words he chose, and the impact of his message. The rising conflict had brought the city to the edge. Musk's voice would either push it over or pull it back. This chapter reveals the complexity behind that decision, the emotions and struggles that rarely made headlines but were crucial to understanding the man and the moment. In this turbulent chapter of history, Musk's personal battle mirrored the city's fight for peace and justice. Both faced uncertainty, pain, and the hope for renewal. As the unrest continued, Musk's silence grew heavier until it finally shattered, ushering in a new phase of the story. Stay tuned for the next chapter, where the unexpected journey begins, where Elon Musk steps into the public eye with a message that challenges assumptions and ignites conversations. The city waits. The world watches. The moment is here. When Elon Musk finally broke his silence amid the escalating unrest in Los Angeles, it wasn't just another public statement, it was the beginning of a profound and unexpected journey that stunned the city and captured global attention. For days, the streets had echoed with cries for justice, frustration boiling over into chaos. The eyes of the world were on LA, watching as fires burned and hopes flickered. Musk's announcement came suddenly and without the usual corporate polish. His words were raw, honest, and deeply human, reflecting a man who had wrestled with his own doubts and fears before deciding to speak. "This city is hurting," he said. "I've been watching the pain and anger, and I know silence isn't the answer. We need solutions, not just slogans." What followed was not the usual billionaire distancing or corporate platitudes but a pledge to use his resources, technology, and influence to help the city heal. Musk proposed a multifaceted approach, blending innovation with empathy, and technology with community engagement. First, he announced a new initiative called LA Rebuild, focused on rebuilding damaged neighborhoods with sustainable, green technology. Solar panels, energy-efficient homes, and community centers would rise from the ashes, creating jobs and hope. Next, Musk pledged support for educational programs targeting underserved youth, particularly in STEM fields, aiming to inspire the next generation to envision and create better futures. The statement included an emotional appeal to city leaders, law enforcement, activists, and residents to come together in dialogue and action. Musk's message was clear: healing required collaboration and courage from all sides. The impact was immediate and electric. The city buzzed with reaction. Some welcomed Musk's involvement as a beacon of hope, others remained skeptical of his motives. But no one could deny that his voice had shifted the conversation. Behind the scenes, Musk began a hands-on journey, traveling to affected neighborhoods, meeting residents, activists, and local officials. These encounters were transformative. Listening to stories of loss, resilience, and determination deepened Musk's understanding of the city's complexities. He realized that technology alone couldn't solve social problems. Change required empathy, trust, and time. The vivid sights of charred buildings, murals painted by community members, and gatherings of neighbors united in rebuilding efforts stayed with him. This journey was not easy. Musk faced criticism from multiple fronts. Some accused him of grandstanding, others questioned the feasibility of his promises. Yet, his commitment never wavered. He worked tirelessly, leveraging Tesla and SpaceX's expertise to develop innovative solutions tailored to the city's needs. Solar microgrids were installed in affected areas, providing clean energy and reducing costs. Tesla's battery technology powered community shelters, and SpaceX offered internet access to underserved neighborhoods, bridging digital divides. Meanwhile, Musk's presence sparked conversations across America about the role of billionaires and tech leaders in social justice and community healing. His actions challenged traditional narratives and inspired other entrepreneurs to consider their social responsibilities. The climactic journey also took a personal toll. Long days of meetings, visits, and public appearances strained Musk's health and relationships. But he found renewed purpose in these efforts, a chance to bridge the gap between his technological dreams and real-world impact. The journey culminated in a public forum where Musk stood alongside activists, city leaders, and residents. Together, they discussed plans, challenges, and hopes for LA's future. Musk listened more than he spoke, understanding that true leadership meant amplifying voices beyond his own. This moment symbolized a turning point, not just for the city, but for Musk himself. He had moved from silent observer to engaged participant, from visionary alone to collaborator in a complex, living community. As the chapter closes, the city begins to heal, but the road ahead remains long and uncertain. Musk's unexpected intervention sparked hope but also underscored the depth of the challenges. The journey continues, shaped by courage, conflict, and a shared vision for a better tomorrow. The next chapter will reveal the emotional climax, the moment when the full impact of Musk's words and actions come into sharp focus, shaking both the city and Musk to their cores. The story unfolds with tension, hope, and a profound exploration of what it means to lead in times of crisis. Stay tuned. The city of Los Angeles, still reeling from weeks of unrest, watched with bated breath as Elon Musk's involvement deepened beyond expectations. His public appearances, the launch of the LA Rebuild initiative, and the collaborative forums brought a flicker of hope to many. Yet beneath the surface, an emotional climax was building, one that would expose hidden truths, challenge assumptions, and leave the city stunned. In one of Musk's visits to a devastated neighborhood, he met Maria Hernandez, a community organizer whose family had lived in the area for generations. Her story embodied the complex tapestry of pain, resilience, and hope that characterized the city's unrest. Maria spoke candidly about the systemic injustices her community faced: lack of access to quality education, affordable housing, and employment opportunities. She also spoke about the anger that fueled the protests, a raw response to years of neglect and broken promises. This encounter profoundly affected Musk. For the first time, he fully grasped the human cost behind headlines and statistics. The emotional weight of Maria's words stayed with him long after he left the neighborhood. It was a turning point. Musk realized that rebuilding physical infrastructure was necessary but not sufficient. Healing required addressing deep-rooted social wounds. This insight prompted Musk to publicly acknowledge a truth that few billionaires dared voice: that wealth and technology alone could not fix systemic inequality. During a televised forum broadcast across the nation, Musk laid bare this reality. Technology can be a powerful tool, he said, but it's not a substitute for justice, compassion, and listening to those who have been marginalized. The admission stunned many. For years, Musk had been seen primarily as a symbol of technological progress and futuristic dreams. Now, he was confronting uncomfortable truths about society and his own role within it. The emotional climax reached its peak when, during a live Q&A session, a young activist confronted Musk with a question that cut to the core. "Mr. Musk," she asked, "how can we trust that your involvement is genuine? How do we know this isn't just a PR move to protect your image?" The room fell silent. Musk paused, then answered with unexpected vulnerability. "I understand the skepticism," he said. "I've made mistakes and been accused of many things. But if this moment can bring real change, I'm willing to put my reputation on the line." This honesty resonated deeply with many in the audience. It was a rare moment of connection that transcended social and economic divides. Yet, just as hope seemed to take root, the story took an unexpected turn. Reports surfaced that a faction within the city's political establishment was working to undermine Musk's initiatives, fearing his influence and independence. These officials leaked misinformation to the press, attempting to portray Musk as an opportunist exploiting the crisis. The shocking twist exposed the layers of complexity surrounding the unrest. Where progress was hindered not only by social and economic challenges but also by political power struggles. Musk faced backlash once again, this time from entrenched interests threatened by change. Instead of retreating, Musk doubled down. He publicly called out the attempts to sabotage progress and urged citizens to hold their leaders accountable. The emotional climax was both painful and galvanizing. It revealed the harsh realities of trying to enact change in a fractured society but also the power of perseverance and transparency. Through it all, Musk's character evolved visibly. From the distant, enigmatic billionaire, he became a figure willing to confront uncomfortable truths and engage deeply with the city's struggles. This transformation inspired many and invited critical reflection from others. As this chapter closes, Los Angeles stands at a crossroads. The unrest continues to simmer, but there is a new sense of possibility in the air. Musk's intervention has sparked debates, alliances, and renewed energy for change. The emotional climax marks a moment of reckoning, for the city, for Musk, and for the nation. What follows is a resolution shaped by lessons learned, sacrifices made, and a shared vision for a future where technology and humanity can coexist and thrive. The next chapter will explore the resolution and reflection that come after this pivotal moment. It will delve into the lasting impact of Musk's involvement and the profound life lessons that emerge from this chapter of conflict and hope. Stay with the story, the journey is far from over. After the intense emotional climax and the unexpected political backlash, a fragile calm began to settle over Los Angeles. The fires were out, the streets were quieter, but the scars, both physical and emotional, remained. Elon Musk's intervention had sparked not only a wave of initiatives but also a deeper conversation about the city's future, its challenges, and the role of leadership in times of crisis. The resolution that began to take shape was not simple or immediate, it was a process, messy, gradual, and deeply human. Musk himself underwent a profound transformation, from a figure viewed primarily as a tech visionary to one seen as a complex leader willing to confront social realities beyond the boardroom. In the weeks following his public statements and the launch of the LA Rebuild initiative, Musk stayed deeply engaged. He continued meeting with community members, activists, and local leaders, listening more than directing. These conversations often challenged him, forcing him to reconsider assumptions and broaden his perspective. One recurring theme was the need for inclusion, ensuring that those most affected by the unrest had a voice in shaping solutions. Musk embraced this approach, working to create partnerships that empowered local organizations and prioritized community-led development. The rebuilding efforts progressed with a focus on sustainability and resilience. Solar-powered community centers opened their doors, providing safe spaces and resources. Educational programs flourished, inspiring young people to explore science, technology, engineering, and math. The combination of innovation and compassion began to shift the city's narrative, from one of despair to one of possibility. Yet Musk never portrayed this as a victory or an endpoint. He openly acknowledged the ongoing struggles and the work yet to be done. In a reflective essay published in a major outlet, Musk wrote, "Change is rarely linear or easy. It demands courage to face uncomfortable truths and humility to listen and learn. This city's strength lies not in its buildings but in its people, and in their ability to imagine a better tomorrow." The message resonated widely. For many, it was a call to action; for others, a reminder of the complexities behind headlines and social media debates. The resolution phase also highlighted the importance of sacrifice and collaboration. Musk made public gestures of support for workers and community leaders who risked their safety during the unrest. He advocated for policies addressing economic inequality and systemic barriers. These efforts showed a deepening understanding that technology alone could not heal wounds or fix societal problems without addressing underlying injustices. Family and personal relationships, once strained by the pressures of fame and crisis, began to find new balance. Musk's renewed focus on empathy and presence helped repair bonds with loved ones and close friends. This personal growth paralleled his public evolution and underscored the theme of transformation running through the story. The resolution was marked by a meaningful message, that love, sacrifice, and unity are essential to overcoming adversity. As Musk reflected, life's challenges reveal our true character. It's through connection and commitment to others that we find strength and purpose. The story closed on a hopeful note, while acknowledging that the road ahead was still long and uncertain. The foundations for healing and progress were laid. Los Angeles began to emerge not just from unrest but toward a future shaped by collective vision and resilience. Musk's journey from silence to leadership had profound implications far beyond the city. It sparked global conversations about the responsibilities of innovators and the power of empathy in leadership. This resolution invited readers and viewers to reflect on their own roles in facing societal challenges and the potential within each person to push forward even when things get tough. The story ended with the line that tied back to the opening question and call to action: what's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? This closing invited the audience to engage, to find their own spark amid adversity. The story of Elon Musk amid Los Angeles unrest is more than a headline or a viral moment, it's a narrative about human complexity, the interplay of technology and society, and the enduring power of hope and love. The chapters detail descriptions of the city's evolving landscape, from charred ruins to vibrant community spaces, paint a vivid picture of transformation. The emotions felt by Musk and those he encountered breathe life into the narrative, making it feel like a movie unfolding in real time. This story, with its tension and hope, conflict and resolution, character development and philosophical insight, reminds us that even in the darkest moments, love and courage can light the way. As the story closes, the city is still learning, growing, and healing, just like the people who call it home. And Elon Musk's voice, once silent amid chaos, now joins theirs in a chorus of resilience and change. In the weeks and months following Elon Musk's public intervention and the launch of the LA Rebuild Initiative, the city began to experience a complex mixture of healing and new challenges. The initial surge of hope and unity inspired by Musk's involvement ignited community energy, yet the underlying tensions that had sparked the unrest did not simply vanish. The aftermath revealed a city still grappling with deep economic disparities, racial tensions, and political divisions. Musk's message had opened doors, but the work ahead demanded more than technology and resources, it required sustained commitment and adaptability. As the dust settled on burned-out neighborhoods and damaged businesses, local leaders, activists, and residents collaborated in new ways, fueled by the momentum Musk helped generate. Community organizations reported increased volunteer engagement, while youth programs flourished with Musk support. Yet, these successes were tempered by setbacks. Funding gaps, bureaucratic hurdles, and skepticism from some community members complicated progress. Some activists remained wary of Musk's motives, concerned that corporate interests might overshadow grassroots efforts. This tension highlighted a central challenge, building trust across diverse groups with different histories and perspectives. Musk recognized this complexity and made a point of stepping back from the spotlight to elevate local voices. He supported advisory councils comprised of residents who could shape rebuilding priorities. His companies adapted projects based on community feedback, embracing a more inclusive approach. Meanwhile, new challenges emerged on the political front. The faction that had attempted to undermine Musk's efforts continued to resist change, creating obstacles to policy reforms addressing housing, policing, and economic justice. Musk publicly advocated for transparent governance and accountability, urging elected officials to listen to their constituents and embrace innovation responsibly. This stance earned both praise and criticism, further fueling debates about the appropriate role of wealthy entrepreneurs in public affairs. On a broader scale, Musk's engagement sparked national conversations about social justice, corporate responsibility, and the potential for technology to support community healing. Cities across the United States watched closely, some inspired to launch similar initiatives. The ripple effect extended beyond borders, influencing global discourse on leadership in times of crisis. Musk's personal journey also evolved during this period. The emotional and physical toll of intense public scrutiny and relentless work was significant. Yet he remained driven by a newfound sense of purpose that balanced ambition with empathy. His reflections on privilege, responsibility, and the limits of technology deepened, shaping his future projects and public statements. Family and personal relationships, strengthened by Musk's renewed empathy, provided crucial support. Moments of vulnerability shared with loved ones grounded him amid the whirlwind of public life. As the city continued to heal, Musk's story became a symbol of possibility, the idea that even the most powerful figures must confront their own limitations and learn from the communities they seek to serve. The aftermath was not a neat conclusion but an ongoing process, a mosaic of triumphs and setbacks, unity and division, hope and realism. Musk's message, once shocking and unexpected, settled into a legacy of both inspiration and challenge. The chapter closes with vivid descriptions of Los Angeles, streets still bearing marks of unrest but alive with murals, community gardens, and gatherings that celebrate resilience. Musk's words echo in the air, change demands patience and courage. The future belongs to those willing to listen, learn, and act together. This invitation to collective responsibility resonates beyond the story, urging readers and viewers to consider their own roles in shaping a just and compassionate society. The narrative's tension and hope, conflict and resolution continue to intertwine, reflecting the ongoing journey of a city and a man transformed by crisis. The next chapter will explore new personal and professional challenges Musk faces as he balances his expanding vision with the realities of leading amid controversy and change. Stay with the story, the path forward is filled with unexpected turns. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? As Los Angeles began its gradual recovery, Elon Musk found himself at an unexpected crossroads. What started as a response to the city's turmoil had evolved into a transformative journey, one that not only reshaped the city but also forced Musk to confront new dimensions of leadership and responsibility. His influence, though transformative, had drawn the attention of critics and allies alike. The pressure mounted, and Musk had to navigate a delicate balance between the public demands for change and his own personal limitations. The city, no longer on fire but still wounded, needed continued leadership, but this leadership wasn't easy to define. Musk's actions had garnered praise for the LA Rebuild initiative and his focus on sustainable urban development, education, and community-driven projects. Yet, the moment he made any further move, it seemed there were those ready to pounce, accusing him of overstepping or leveraging the crisis for personal or corporate gain. The accusations were loud and relentless, as critics reminded the world that Musk's companies had been a source of controversy in their own right. Tesla's labor practices were often scrutinized, SpaceX faced concerns over its environmental impact, and Musk's social media presence had long been polarizing. With each initiative Musk launched, the scrutiny only intensified. Some questioned whether Musk's approach was the right one. The LA Rebuild program's focus on high-tech solutions was divisive. Critics argued that while solar-powered microgrids and Tesla battery systems were groundbreaking, they weren't the right solution for the immediate needs of Angelenos, particularly those who had lost their homes or faced unemployment. Many wondered if the money Musk was investing could be better spent elsewhere, perhaps on direct relief or on building more affordable housing. "We need homes, not batteries," one vocal activist argued at a town hall meeting where Musk appeared. "Technology is great, but it doesn't put food on the table or rebuild the lives of those displaced by the violence." Musk didn't flinch. He responded with his signature calm but steely resolve. "I understand your frustration," he said, "and I know that these issues are complicated. Technology is not the only answer, but it can be part of the solution. That's why we're working with local leaders and community organizations to make sure this is a partnership, not a top-down directive." The more Musk engaged, the more he realized the tensions were not only between different segments of society but also within himself. On the one hand, he was a visionary entrepreneur who believed deeply in the power of technology to solve humanity's greatest challenges. On the other, he was a man who had seen the human cost of those same challenges and felt an increasing sense of responsibility to do more than just invent things. It was a crossroads that demanded more than just technological solutions. It was a moment in Musk's life that required him to consider the broader impact of his choices and to reckon with his own public persona. With every new initiative, Musk faced increasingly difficult questions. How much influence should he wield in shaping policy? Should he continue to insert himself into the political and social fabric of a city so torn by unrest? Was he, in fact, part of the problem? An outsider whose wealth and power made him out of touch with the very people he sought to help. It was clear that Musk's vision of a future driven by technology would require political cooperation and public trust. But gaining that trust had become a much more complicated task. To add to this growing pressure, Musk's personal life had once again become the subject of public speculation. As he became more embroiled in the affairs of Los Angeles, his relationships with close friends and family members were strained. The time and energy he invested in the city's recovery were taking their toll on his personal life. Friends, once supportive of Musk's bold endeavors, began expressing concerns that he was losing touch with his own identity. They worried that Musk was prioritizing the future of a city he had only recently become deeply involved in, while ignoring the needs of those closest to him. His children, in particular, had begun to voice their confusion. Musk's decision to dedicate so much time to Los Angeles, leaving behind his family in many ways, was a source of tension at home. One of his children, feeling the absence most acutely, expressed their frustration in a letter, "Dad, we miss you. You're always talking about changing the world, but we miss the old you, the one who would spend time with us, who didn't always have to be in front of the cameras. I know you want to make a difference, but what about us? What about your own family?" This letter shook Musk to his core. In it, he recognized something profound, that his pursuit of greatness, while noble in its own right, had created a distance between him and those who mattered most. It was a painful reminder that true leadership, whether on a global scale or within one's own family, was about balance, about showing up, listening, and being present. Musk took a step back from his public commitments, deciding to spend more time with his children. It was a humbling moment in his journey, and it forced him to reevaluate his role, not just as a public figure but as a father, a friend, and a person. As he worked through this personal reflection, Musk made another significant decision. He began scaling back his public appearances, choosing instead to focus on a smaller, more targeted set of initiatives in Los Angeles. His focus shifted toward collaboration with grassroots organizations, offering financial support and technological expertise without trying to control the narrative. He recognized that true leadership in times of crisis wasn't about making sweeping declarations, it was about listening, learning, and empowering others to act. His presence in the city continued, but it was more deliberate and intentional. Musk's emotional journey mirrored that of the city itself. Los Angeles, like Musk, had been through a great deal of trauma. It had endured cycles of violence, injustice, and division, but it was learning how to move forward, piece by piece. The work was not glamorous, it was not about grand gestures or flashy announcements. It was about showing up, doing the hard work, and rebuilding trust. Just as Musk began to reconnect with his own values and personal priorities, the city started to see more tangible, lasting improvements. Small businesses reopened, community centers became hubs for healing and dialogue, and people who had been displaced began to find new homes. Although the issues of inequality and systemic injustice hadn't been solved, the foundations for a better future were beginning to take shape. In the end, the crossroads Musk faced wasn't a moment of decision between opposing paths, it was the realization that leadership, at its core, is about the balance between action and reflection, between progress and patience. The chapter closes on a poignant note, showing Musk walking through a neighborhood that had been severely damaged during the unrest. The streets were no longer filled with smoke or violence but with people working together to rebuild. It was a symbol of a future that was, in many ways, still uncertain, but filled with the possibility of change. Musk paused at a community gathering where local residents were discussing plans for a new solar farm. A woman from the group looked up at him and said, "This isn't about technology. It's about people working together." Musk smiled. "I think you're right," he replied. It always was. The shifting tides of change in Los Angeles did not stop with Elon Musk's personal reflections or decisions. The city itself, now visibly scarred but more resilient, began to show signs of a collective awakening. Communities that once felt fractured and forgotten began to rediscover their strength. Residents who had participated in the protests, who had once felt the weight of their voices unheard, now found themselves shaping their futures in new ways. Musk's involvement, though controversial and frequently criticized, ignited something larger than a corporate or philanthropic effort. It sparked a movement, a quiet yet profound awakening within the city's heart. The transformation was not linear. It wasn't the kind of change that could be measured in headlines or shiny reports. It was slower, messier, and deeply human. But it was happening, nonetheless. As Musk pulled back from his more public-facing role, local leaders stepped forward to pick up the mantle. Community leaders, activists, and grassroots organizations who had once seen Musk's involvement with suspicion now began to work alongside him more closely, appreciative of his willingness to listen and change course when necessary. The city's young people were among the most profoundly impacted. New initiatives focused on youth empowerment began to flourish. A partnership between local schools and tech companies, bolstered by Musk's vision, led to the creation of mentorship programs where students from disadvantaged backgrounds were paired with professionals in technology, engineering, and science. For many, this was the first tangible glimpse of a future that was not only brighter but more accessible. Even in neighborhoods that had been ravaged by the unrest, new projects bloomed. Solar-powered community centers became the heart of neighborhoods, not just because they offered electricity but because they offered hope. They became gathering places for parents, kids, and local leaders to discuss how they would overcome the obstacles in their path. Over time, these centers became hubs for collaboration, places where technology wasn't just a buzzword but a tool to solve real problems. It was here that Musk saw the full power of what he had set into motion. Technology combined with human effort and empathy was beginning to reshape the fabric of the city. But the transformation was still a delicate process. The city had a long way to go, and the skepticism that had marked the early stages of Musk's involvement didn't disappear. There were still those who believed the billionaire was an outsider, an opportunist whose agenda would never align with the needs of everyday people. Some politicians, wary of the influence Musk wielded, tried to challenge his projects at every turn. Yet, in an ironic twist, it was these very challenges that solidified the lasting impact of Musk's work. Each setback, each political maneuver to undermine his efforts, only further cemented the notion that change, real change, was not easy. But it was worth the fight. One evening, Musk found himself at a gathering in one of the city's hardest-hit neighborhoods. The event was a community celebration, an effort to showcase the progress that had been made in the months since the height of the unrest. It was a simple affair, with food, music, and speeches from local leaders who had worked alongside Musk in the recovery efforts. As he walked through the crowd, he was greeted by familiar faces, the community organizers who had once been his critics, the young activists who had questioned his sincerity, and even the small business owners who had seen their livelihoods threatened. They had all come to celebrate what they had built together, and Musk was there to witness it firsthand. He stood quietly on the edge of the crowd, observing the faces around him. He saw people who had once been afraid to hope, now laughing and exchanging stories. There was a new kind of energy in the air, hope, yes, but also a sense of agency. The people in the crowd no longer waited for someone to come and save them. They had learned to save themselves, to fight for their future and their community. It was at that moment that Musk truly understood what his involvement had meant. It wasn't about bringing in resources or technology, it was about planting seeds and giving people the tools to grow. It was about showing them that their voices mattered, that they could reshape the world they lived in. As the night wore on, Musk was invited to speak. He had done countless interviews and press conferences in the past, but this time it was different. He was not speaking to a room of reporters or influencers, he was speaking directly to the people he had come to respect, the people whose lives had been so deeply affected by the unrest. When his turn came, he stood before the crowd, feeling the weight of the moment. The applause that greeted him was not the loud, enthusiastic applause of a fanbase. It was something more solemn, a recognition of effort, of struggle, and of hope. Musk paused before speaking, taking in the faces of the crowd before him. "I don't have all the answers," he said simply. "I'm just a guy who believes in technology and progress. But I've learned something important through all of this. It's not about being right or having the best solution, it's about working together. It's about each of us playing a part. And what I've seen here tonight makes me believe that, no matter how tough things get, we have the power to rebuild, to create something new. Not just for us, but for the next generation." His words, though brief, had an immediate impact. There were no grand promises, no flashy declarations, just the truth. And in that moment, Musk realized something profound, that his journey in Los Angeles had never been about him. It had been about the people he had met along the way, the lives he had touched, and the collective power of individuals coming together to create change. After the speech, Musk stayed for hours, talking to people, laughing, and listening to their stories. For the first time in a long while, he felt connected to something larger than himself. The city, and the people in it, had taught him an invaluable lesson, that leadership is not about control, but about service. It is not about what you can build on your own, but what you can create with others. As the evening came to a close and Musk prepared to leave, a young girl approached him. She couldn't have been more than 12 years old, but her eyes were sharp, and her words even sharper. "Thank you," she said, looking him directly in the eye. "You helped my community. You gave us a chance." Musk smiled, feeling an unexpected surge of gratitude. "You did all the hard work," he replied. "I just helped open a few doors." She shook her head, the smile never leaving her face. "No, you didn't just open doors. You showed us how to build them." It was a simple statement, but in that moment, Musk realized that the city of Los Angeles had done something for him, too. It had shown him the true meaning of leadership, that sometimes, the greatest change happens not from the top down, but from the ground up. The story was far from over, but as Musk left the gathering, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. The city, like him, had transformed. And, just as importantly, it had taught him that sometimes, in the most unexpected of places, you find your greatest teachers. As Los Angeles began to settle into a rhythm of cautious optimism, Elon Musk found himself at the precipice of an unexpected decision. The progress he had seen in the city, while deeply moving, was only one part of a much larger puzzle. For Musk, the crisis in Los Angeles had been both a revelation and a test of his leadership. But as much as he had given to the city, he knew the challenges ahead weren't limited to one geography. The lessons he had learned, both personal and professional, transcended Los Angeles. His journey had begun as an intervention in a city on the brink, but it was quickly evolving into something that would demand his attention on a global scale. After months of being deeply immersed in the recovery efforts, Musk realized that he could not remain forever in the whirlwind of LA's transformation. He knew that Los Angeles was just one story in a much larger narrative about inequality, social unrest, and the need for sustainable change across the globe. As he prepared for a series of meetings and discussions with both local and international leaders, Musk reflected on how far he had come. He had been a lightning rod for criticism, a disruptor in ways that challenged conventional approaches to philanthropy, politics, and corporate responsibility. And yet, he had emerged as a symbol not just of technology-driven solutions but of the potential for people to come together, even in the most difficult times, to create lasting change. But now, he faced a more personal challenge: what was next? His private world, once dominated by ambitions related to space exploration, electric cars, and AI, was suddenly intertwined with the lessons learned from a city like Los Angeles. His commitment to the city had changed him in ways that he was still processing. The ideas of progress, innovation, and efficiency that had always driven him were now complemented by a deeper understanding of empathy, collaboration, and community. Still, the weight of the future loomed large. As he prepared to leave Los Angeles, Musk felt a sense of urgency. He had learned that leadership was not about simply responding to crises but about shaping futures. It was clear that the world, beyond LA, was in need of the same kind of approach. His team of advisors, including engineers, policymakers, and social impact leaders, began to map out what the next phase of his journey would look like. While Musk had made significant strides in transforming public perceptions of his companies, particularly Tesla and SpaceX, it was evident that his role as a catalyst for change had taken on a new dimension. It was no longer just about creating products or technology, it was about creating systems of collaboration, resilience, and sustainability on a global scale. One of the first challenges that Musk turned his attention to was the growing climate crisis. The lessons from Los Angeles had brought to light the fragile relationship between communities and the environment. The technology Musk had developed, such as solar panels, battery storage, and sustainable energy solutions, had the potential to address some of the world's most pressing issues, but only if they were implemented on a larger scale. In a bold move, Musk called for a global summit of industry leaders, activists, scientists, and policymakers to discuss the future of sustainability and climate change. The event was held in a sleek conference hall in Geneva, Switzerland, and it was nothing short of historic. The attendees included some of the most powerful figures in the world, from leaders of international organizations to activists like Greta Thunberg, environmental scientists, and tech pioneers. As Musk stood before them, the weight of the moment was palpable. He wasn't just there to present a new project or a groundbreaking technology. He was there to present a new vision of global cooperation, one that was not just about policies or economic incentives but about empowering communities to take action. His speech was simple, powerful, and unflinching. "The world is at a crossroads," Musk began, his voice steady and commanding. "We can continue down the path of business as usual, a path that has led us to environmental collapse, economic inequality, and social unrest. Or we can choose something different. We can choose a path where technology serves humanity, not the other way around. But to do that, we must be willing to act, not tomorrow, not in 5 years, but today. We must be willing to see the world as interconnected, where the actions of one community, one company, or one nation impact everyone else." Musk's words reverberated through the room, sparking a series of impassioned discussions that lasted for hours. While some were skeptical of his bold vision, others saw the potential for change in Musk's call to action. What struck many of the leaders in the room was his unwavering commitment not just to the science of climate change but to the people who were most affected by it. As the summit concluded, Musk found himself engaged in private talks with a number of world leaders. These conversations were not just about funding or policies, they were about finding practical ways to integrate sustainability into every facet of global infrastructure. Musk proposed a radical idea: what if cities, particularly those in vulnerable areas, could be transformed into models of sustainable innovation? What if entire communities, not just select individuals, could have access to cutting-edge technology that powered their homes, businesses, and schools? He began outlining a new initiative, a global network of green cities, where Tesla's solar products, SpaceX's technology, and other sustainable innovations could be deployed in an integrated, community-driven effort. These cities would be pilot programs for a larger-scale, green revolution. Musk was not suggesting that this would be easy. In fact, he was well aware of the hurdles ahead. There were entrenched political interests, large corporations, and conservative factions that would resist the shift toward sustainability. There would also be the immense challenge of ensuring that these changes didn't create further divisions but instead fostered inclusivity and equity. But Musk had always believed that transformative change came when people were willing to take bold risks. It was a vision that would take years to realize, but Musk was willing to take the first steps. As the idea for the Green Cities project began to take shape, Musk turned to his team of engineers and designers. They began working on prototypes for new technologies, cheaper, more efficient solar panels, advanced battery systems capable of storing energy for entire communities, and systems that would allow for decentralized power generation. The technology was there, but it needed to be scaled up in a way that made sense for diverse communities. Musk also knew that this wasn't just a technological problem, it was a social one. The success of the Green Cities project depended on collaboration at every level. Local governments, community organizations, and activists needed to be brought into the fold. This was not going to be a top-down solution but a partnership between technology, government, and the people who lived in these communities. Musk's new approach was rooted in the lessons he had learned from Los Angeles, his belief that change must come from within, and that the people most affected by the problems were the ones best equipped to solve them. As Musk launched the first phase of the Green Cities initiative, there were skeptics, as there always were. Yet, Musk remained steadfast. He knew that the road ahead would be difficult, but the alternative was far worse. And this time, he wasn't just fighting for the future of technology, he was fighting for the future of the planet itself. The challenges of the global climate crisis, social inequality, and political polarization were massive, but Musk's experience in Los Angeles had taught him one key lesson: there was no such thing as a small step when it came to making meaningful change. The work was just beginning. With the Green Cities initiative taking root, Musk found himself navigating new terrain, one that combined his passion for technology with his growing understanding of social responsibility. The program's first pilot city was set to launch in the heart of an underdeveloped region in Africa, a place where access to sustainable energy had been limited or non-existent. This was not just another venture to Musk. This was a chance to make a true, lasting impact, a chance to lead a global transformation that wasn't about building a product but building a future. The city chosen for the pilot program was a small, struggling town on the outskirts of Nairobi. The region had long been ignored by the world's most developed nations, and it had faced challenges ranging from unreliable electricity grids to extreme poverty and lack of access to education. But this town also had something that Musk believed could turn the tide, an incredibly resourceful, resilient, and determined population. Musk's team arrived with a mission, to transform this town into the first green city, a model of sustainability and self-sufficiency. Tesla's solar panels and batteries would power homes, schools, and businesses. SpaceX's satellite internet would ensure reliable communication and access to the digital world. And, most importantly, local communities would be empowered to drive the changes themselves, giving them not just the technology, but the knowledge to sustain it. The rollout wasn't without its challenges. While the technology was groundbreaking, it had to be adapted to the local needs and infrastructure. The region lacked reliable transportation networks, meaning solar panels and batteries had to be delivered in small batches via trucks that could navigate the poorly maintained roads. But Musk's team was undeterred. They adapted, getting creative with logistics and working hand in hand with local leaders to ensure that everything could be transported safely and efficiently. What Musk hadn't anticipated was how quickly the residents of the town would embrace the project. Local leaders, once skeptical, began to see the tangible benefits of the technology. They saw families that once spent hours searching for firewood or kerosene to light their homes now lighting their homes with clean, solar-powered energy. Businesses that once operated on unreliable grids began to run more efficiently. Schools that had struggled with inconsistent power sources now had reliable electricity, allowing them to use computers and access the internet for the first time. But the most significant shift came in the form of local empowerment. Musk had always believed in the power of technology to solve problems, but in this community, he began to realize that the true potential of the Green Cities initiative wasn't just in the technology itself, it was in the way that technology could foster collaboration, education, and self-reliance. Community members weren't just passive recipients of technology, they were active participants in the process. Local residents, many of whom had never been exposed to solar energy or advanced battery systems, were learning to install and maintain the technology themselves. They were becoming solar engineers, battery technicians, and digital pioneers, all thanks to the knowledge-sharing initiatives built into the Green Cities framework. Musk sat down one evening with a group of local women who had been trained to maintain the solar systems installed in their neighborhoods. They shared their stories with him. Stories of the challenges they had faced before the project, and how their lives had changed since they started working with the solar technology. One woman, named Amina, spoke about how her life had been transformed. Before the solar panels came, she said, we had to gather wood every day, sometimes for hours, just to cook. Our children couldn't study in the evenings because it was too dark. Now, my children study late into the night. And I have a small shop where I sell food, things I couldn't sell before because my business didn't have electricity. This has given us so much more than just light. Musk was struck by the simplicity yet profound impact of her words. This was not just about providing energy, it was about unlocking opportunities. It was about giving people the chance to break free from cycles of poverty and instability. As he spoke with other community members, he realized that this initiative was bigger than he had imagined. It was not just about creating green cities. It was about creating a new model for the world. It was about harnessing the power of innovation not just to address environmental concerns but to drive social and economic progress. The success of the Nairobi project began to attract global attention. Journalists, policymakers, and business leaders from around the world traveled to see the transformation for themselves. Musk was invited to speak at international summits, from the United Nations to major climate conferences, where his Green Cities initiative was hailed as a game-changer. He had found a way to marry technology with real, tangible outcomes for communities in need. However, as the initiative expanded, Musk faced new challenges. He had always been a visionary, but the global scale of the Green Cities initiative demanded new levels of collaboration. He needed to align not just local leaders but also large corporations, international NGOs, and government entities with his vision of sustainable cities. One of the first obstacles came from traditional energy companies, who saw Musk's efforts as a threat to their business models. Fossil fuel-based energy providers lobbied against the Green Cities initiative, arguing that it was unrealistic to expect entire cities to shift to solar power and renewable energy sources. They claimed that Musk's plan was too idealistic and would be too costly to implement on a wide scale. Musk remained undeterred. He knew the road ahead would be filled with resistance, but he believed deeply in the need for change. He also understood that this was not just about environmentalism, it was about creating a new economic paradigm. By shifting the world's energy infrastructure to renewable sources, he believed it would open up new industries, create jobs, and drive innovation on a scale that was previously unimaginable. Another challenge came from the political realm. As more governments around the world began to adopt the Green Cities framework, Musk found himself caught in the complex world of international politics. Countries with deeply entrenched political and economic systems were hesitant to embrace the kind of radical transformation that Musk was proposing. In some cases, governments were slow to adopt the policies that would make the Green Cities initiative feasible. Musk, ever the pragmatist, recognized that the solution wouldn't come from simply pushing technology into these countries, it would require a combination of strategic partnerships and policy advocacy. So, Musk took a more hands-on approach, working with governments, businesses, and nonprofits to ensure that policies were put in place that would support the transition to sustainable energy systems. He also worked with local stakeholders to create a clear roadmap for implementing these changes in a way that was economically viable and politically feasible. Despite these obstacles, the Green Cities initiative continued to grow. The first city in Africa was joined by other pilot cities in Latin America, Southeast Asia, and the Middle East. Each city faced unique challenges, but the basic principles of the initiative remained the same: sustainable energy, community empowerment, and collaborative leadership. In each case, the impact was undeniable. As Musk visited these cities and met with local leaders, he saw firsthand how his vision was being realized. In some places, entire neighborhoods had been transformed. In others, the ripple effect was still in its early stages, but the foundation had been laid. Musk knew that the journey was far from over. The challenges were immense, but so too was the opportunity. He had always believed in the power of technology to solve the world's most pressing problems. But now, through the Green Cities initiative, he was beginning to see just how powerful the combination of technology, collaboration, and community empowerment could be. As Musk stood on the rooftop of a solar-powered building in one of the new green cities, looking out at the sunset, he felt something he hadn't in a long time: a sense of fulfillment. The future, though still uncertain, was bright. And it was just beginning. As the Green Cities initiative gained momentum and spread across different continents, Elon Musk found himself standing at the intersection of possibility and resistance. What had started as a dream to use technology to heal fractured communities had grown into an undeniable global movement. Yet, with each success came increasing opposition, some from industries, some from political figures, and some from the very people who feared change. The world, it seemed, was not ready to abandon the traditional models of power and governance that had kept it stable for centuries. To Musk, the scale of resistance was never surprising. He had always believed in the power of bold action to disrupt entrenched systems, but now, more than ever, the consequences of that disruption were coming into sharp focus. He had not anticipated how deep the roots of the fossil fuel industry ran, nor how entrenched economic and political systems were when it came to resisting a fundamental shift in global infrastructure. The pushback came swiftly, from all sides. Fossil fuel companies, seeing their profits threatened by the widespread adoption of renewable energy, waged a fierce PR campaign to undermine the Green Cities project. They questioned the viability of the technology, arguing that it was too expensive and too ambitious. Political figures who had long benefited from the support of traditional energy lobbies tried to block key initiatives, lobbying against subsidies for renewable energy and questioning the sustainability of Musk's plans. Even some of Musk's closest allies began to waver. The complexity of scaling the initiative across different nations and cultures meant that local governments were slow to adopt the necessary policies for Musk's vision to work. Some governments worried about the political ramifications of embracing an American entrepreneur's vision over their own indigenous solutions. And then there were the inevitable cultural clashes. In some countries, local leaders and communities had different priorities, often centered around immediate survival rather than long-term environmental sustainability. To them, Musk's lofty ideas of green cities felt like a luxury rather than a necessity. "I didn't start this to make friends," Musk said to his closest advisors one morning. "I started it to make a difference. But the harder we push, the more resistance we face. And now we have to face it head-on." His words were blunt, but they reflected a deeper frustration that had begun to gnaw at him. For all the progress, for all the people whose lives had already been transformed by the Green Cities initiative, Musk couldn't shake the feeling that the hardest battle was still ahead. As he reflected on the challenges, his thoughts turned to his next big step. It was time to take the Green Cities initiative to the global stage. But the next phase would require something more than technology. It would require the political will of entire nations. It would take not just vision but strategic negotiation, alliances, and a long-term commitment to reshaping the way the world saw energy, economics, and development. Musk's next move was to call for a summit of world leaders, CEOs, climate activists, and economists. The goal was to put forward a unified vision for the future. A vision in which the Green Cities initiative was at the heart of a global push for sustainable development and equitable growth. It was an audacious move. Musk knew that summoning the leaders of the world was no small task. There were trade-offs to be made, compromises to be reached. But this was the moment he had been working toward for years. He understood that real change could only happen when power brokers, politicians, and the private sector came together to shape a new paradigm. The summit was held in Geneva, the epicenter of global diplomacy, and it was a gathering like no other. It was attended by representatives from every major government in the world, CEOs of the largest corporations, climate scientists, social entrepreneurs, and activists from every corner of the globe. The atmosphere was electric, with both optimism and skepticism in equal measure. Would this summit finally mark the turning point in the global fight against climate change? Would world leaders finally set aside their differences and unite behind a common goal of sustainability? The room buzzed with anticipation as Musk took the stage. Dressed in a dark suit, he exuded his usual calm, though there was an underlying sense of urgency in his posture. He wasn't here to impress or to entertain, he was here to persuade. Musk began his speech by acknowledging the gravity of the situation. "We stand at a crossroads," he began. "Our planet faces challenges that we have never seen before: climate change, resource depletion, and growing inequality. But the opportunity to solve these problems is right in front of us. It's in the technology that we have today, and in the systems of collaboration we can build together. I don't believe we need to wait for some miracle. I believe we already have the tools to make a difference. But we must act, and we must act now." His voice was steady, his words clear, but there was something else in his tone, an urgency, a sense that the time for talking was over. He continued, "We can't afford to waste time. If we continue with business as usual, we are setting ourselves, and future generations, up for failure. The Green Cities initiative is not just a project, it is a blueprint for the future. A future where sustainability and economic growth can coexist, where communities are empowered to take control of their own energy, and where the next generation of leaders has the tools they need to thrive in a changing world. The room was quiet as he spoke. Some of the faces in the crowd were skeptical, others hopeful. But one thing was clear: Musk had their attention. Over the course of the day, leaders from different sectors spoke in turn, each offering their perspective on how the Green Cities initiative could be expanded, scaled, and implemented. While the conversations were long and often contentious, there was a marked shift in tone. The more traditional power brokers, many of whom had initially resisted the Green Cities initiative, began to see the economic potential in Musk's vision. Renewable energy, they realized, was not just an environmental issue, it was a business opportunity. Musk's proposals for creating green jobs, advancing clean tech, and fostering sustainable urban growth were appealing to both environmentalists and corporate leaders. By the end of the summit, a series of key agreements had been reached. Nations pledged to commit to renewable energy targets. Governments promised to eliminate fossil fuel subsidies and invest in green technologies. Corporations agreed to share their innovations and scale up their operations to support sustainable growth. For Musk, the victory was not just in the policies signed or the partnerships formed. The true victory lay in the realization that global cooperation was possible. That the world, despite its differences, was beginning to recognize the urgency of the crisis and the potential of Musk's vision. But even as the summit came to a close, Musk knew the work was far from finished. The agreements were a start, but the road ahead would require constant pressure, continuous collaboration, and an unwavering commitment to the cause. The Green Cities initiative had become more than just a movement, it had become the starting point for a new era of global cooperation on climate change, social justice, and economic development. As Musk walked off the stage that day, he felt a profound sense of accomplishment, but also a deep awareness of the mountain still left to climb. The summit had been a turning point, but it was only the beginning. The world had woken up, and now it was time to deliver. The glow of success from the Geneva summit faded quickly as the next challenge emerged, turning the global agreements into action. What had seemed like a moment of unity, a historic turning point, soon devolved into a complex web of political wrangling, corporate infighting, and bureaucratic inertia. Elon Musk, who had spent decades fighting against the grain, now found himself in the most challenging fight of his career. This time, the enemy wasn't a traditional competitor or rival. It was the deep-rooted system of inertia that kept the world moving at a pace far slower than it needed to. In the days following the summit, Musk found himself receiving a constant stream of messages, emails, and calls. Governments, once full of promises, began to hedge on their commitments. Corporations that had pledged to support the Green Cities initiative suddenly found themselves mired in internal debates. Environmentalists who had once been Musk's staunchest allies questioned whether his plans could actually deliver on the promises made. Even some of the communities that had embraced the Green Cities vision in the initial stages began to show signs of frustration, questioning if Musk's technology was really enough to solve the deep, systemic issues they faced. Musk's first instinct, as it often was to throw himself into the fray. He made calls to political leaders, flew to meet with CEOs, and spoke with activists. But the more he pushed, the more he realized that his usual approach, charging ahead full speed, wasn't going to work in this instance. This battle was not just about technology. It was about rebuilding trust, forging lasting partnerships, and navigating the complexities of global politics. Musk began to understand that a new kind of leadership was required, one that involved listening as much as speaking, building consensus as much as dictating terms. But even as the political and corporate landscape seemed to slow down, the people were ready for change. Across the world, grassroots movements supporting the Green Cities initiative began to grow. Communities that had previously been excluded from decision-making were now taking charge, organizing in their own neighborhoods to demand sustainable solutions. Local leaders, inspired by Musk's words in Geneva, were pushing their governments to follow through on the promises made at the summit. And it was these local communities, these unsung heroes, who would become the true drivers of the initiative's success. One such community was a small town in India, located in the heart of a rural area with limited access to electricity. The town had been ravaged by years of mismanagement, corruption, and a lack of infrastructure. But when the Green Cities Initiative was introduced, the town's residents jumped at the opportunity to turn their situation around. Through a partnership with Musk's team, solar panels were installed on homes, and energy-efficient systems were set up for local schools and businesses. Soon, the town began to transform. Children who had once studied by candlelight now had access to reliable electricity. Local entrepreneurs were able to run businesses at night. And families, who had previously been dependent on expensive and unreliable kerosene for cooking and heating, now had access to clean, renewable energy. What made this town's transformation particularly significant was the involvement of the community. From the outset, local leaders and residents had been involved in every step of the process, from installing solar panels to managing the battery systems that stored excess energy. The people of the town had become the guardians of their own future. They weren't just passive recipients of technology, they were active participants in creating a sustainable future for themselves. As the town's success story spread, it began to serve as a model for other communities. Similar efforts were underway in South America, Southeast Asia, and even parts of Eastern Europe, where local activists were pushing for sustainable energy solutions, often against significant opposition from traditional energy companies. Musk realized that these grassroots efforts were the key to overcoming the global resistance. It wasn't just about convincing governments or corporations, it was about empowering the people who would directly benefit from the technology. With their energy, commitment, and determination, these communities had the power to shift the political and economic landscapes in ways that Musk had initially underestimated. Musk began to shift his approach. Rather than waiting for global leaders to take action, he started to work directly with these local communities to ensure the Green Cities Initiative reached the ground level. He traveled to these regions, meeting with activists, local business owners, and community leaders, offering technical support, sharing his knowledge, and, most importantly, listening to their needs. He understood that while his vision of sustainable cities was grand, the reality of implementing it required attention to detail, patience, and a deep understanding of local contexts. But the road was still far from smooth. The corporate world, while increasingly interested in Musk's vision, was still hesitant to fully commit to the scale of change required. Musk found himself in tense meetings with CEOs who, despite their public pledges, were reluctant to make the necessary investments in renewable energy infrastructure. These were not men and women without foresight, they saw the future clearly, but they were still bound by the conservative thinking of their industries. For them, the risk of changing their business models, of embracing the radical new ideas Musk was championing, was too great. It was a battle Musk had fought before, convincing investors and corporate leaders that the future lay in innovation, not stagnation. But this time, the stakes felt higher. The world was teetering on the edge of irreversible climate change, and the window to act was closing fast. Musk couldn't afford to let the status quo continue. So, he did what he did best, he pushed. Musk wasn't content to simply meet with corporate leaders and wait for them to come around. He used his own companies, Tesla and SpaceX, as living proof of the power of innovation. He accelerated his own investments in solar technology and energy storage, and he began working on new ways to make renewable energy even more accessible to individuals and businesses. It was an uphill battle, but Musk had never been afraid of a fight. He didn't care about conventional wisdom or the status quo, he cared about the future. He began to see that the real key to overcoming resistance wasn't just about scaling up technology. It was about shifting mindsets. Around the world, more and more young people were becoming involved in the climate movement. They were organizing protests, calling for political leaders to take action, and pushing for companies to adopt sustainable business practices. This new generation, armed with social media and a powerful sense of urgency, was beginning to hold power accountable in ways that had never been seen before. Musk saw this as an opportunity. Rather than fighting the tide of change, he decided to harness it. He worked with young activists, offering his support and guidance, and ensuring that the Green Cities initiative became part of the broader movement for climate action. The energy of youth, combined with Musk's vision and resources, created a formidable force. And in the process, Musk realized something fundamental: the world wasn't just ready for change, it was desperate for it. The growing movement, both on the ground and in the political sphere, began to make a difference. Governments, still hesitant, started to feel the pressure from their citizens. The financial industry, recognizing the long-term value of sustainable investments, began to pour capital into renewable energy ventures. The resistance, once so strong, began to crack. Musk's work was far from finished. The battle for a sustainable future was only beginning, and the forces of resistance would not disappear overnight. But the Green Cities initiative had now become something larger than Musk, something that couldn't be stopped. The movement had grown beyond a single vision. It was a global fight for the future, and it was a fight that was finally gaining the momentum it needed. As Musk stood on a rooftop in one of the first green cities, watching the sun dip below the horizon, he felt a sense of clarity. The world had heard his call. The time for action had arrived. And this time, the forces of progress would not be stopped. The change, once slow and uncertain, had begun to accelerate. The pushback from global corporations and political leaders had not disappeared, but the pressure from grassroots movements, bolstered by global youth, was undeniable. Elon Musk had learned the hard way that revolution didn't come from one leader alone. It came from a collective, a movement, a shared vision. The Green Cities initiative, initially viewed with skepticism by many, was slowly transforming into something far bigger than Musk himself. The momentum had shifted. With more and more communities adopting sustainable practices, the tide began to turn. Local governments, initially hesitant, started to see the benefits of embracing clean energy. They saw the economic opportunities, the jobs that could be created, and the long-term savings from reducing dependency on fossil fuels. In cities around the world, solar panels were becoming a common sight on rooftops, and electric vehicles were beginning to outnumber gas-powered ones. But the hardest battles were not yet won. While many local governments had embraced the vision, international institutions, whose bureaucracies often moved at a glacial pace, remained cautious. The United Nations, the World Bank, and other global bodies that controlled the flow of international aid and development funds were still reluctant to commit to Musk's ambitious goals. This posed a significant challenge. Without their backing, many of the developing countries that had expressed interest in the Green Cities project would be unable to make the necessary investments to build the infrastructure Musk envisioned. The more he delved into these institutions, the more he realized that entrenched interests were holding things up. The systems of financing, the layers of red tape, and the inertia of decades of policy were all part of the problem. Governments in some regions still relied on foreign loans to fund large infrastructure projects, and these loans were often tied to fossil fuel extraction agreements. Meanwhile, international financial institutions had been slow to adapt to the growing evidence of climate change, preferring to support traditional energy projects that seemed safer, at least in the short term. Musk was no stranger to these systems. He had seen firsthand how entrenched industries could stifle innovation. But now, he was at the heart of a global movement, and this time, the stakes were higher than ever. The struggle to break free from these systems of global finance and policy was a test of patience and perseverance. Musk's usual method, disrupting entrenched industries with bold moves, wasn't going to work here. He needed a more subtle approach. He needed to find a way to build alliances within these global institutions, to make them see that supporting the Green Cities initiative was not just an act of idealism, it was a necessity for the survival of the planet. One strategy Musk began to pursue was working with international climate organizations that were already involved in global environmental policy. He partnered with influential environmental NGOs that had the credibility and networks to influence the policies of the United Nations and the World Bank. These organizations, while not always aligned with Musk's bold business approach, recognized the urgency of the situation. They saw that Musk's initiative offered a solution that was both practical and scalable. Over the next few months, Musk worked tirelessly to build relationships with key leaders within these organizations. He traveled to global environmental conferences, met with policymakers, and held private meetings with financial leaders who controlled the flow of international development funds. His message remained consistent: the Green Cities Initiative wasn't just about building sustainable cities. It was about creating a new global economy based on renewable energy, equitable development, and environmental stewardship. Slowly, things began to shift. At the UN Climate Change Conference, Musk made a historic speech calling for an end to fossil fuel subsidies and a commitment to investing in green technologies. He emphasized the role that international finance could play in accelerating the transition to a sustainable world. His words were bold, even controversial, but they resonated with many of the delegates. "We have reached the tipping point," Musk said, his voice calm but firm. "The world cannot afford to wait for another decade of inaction. We must stop treating the climate crisis as an abstract problem and start treating it as the emergency it is. Governments can no longer ignore the opportunity in front of them, the opportunity to lead a new global economy built on sustainability. We have the tools. We have the technology. Now, we need the political will." The speech was a turning point, not just for Musk but for the global conversation around climate change. His words resonated deeply with younger generations, who had been demanding action from political leaders for years. The younger delegates at the conference rallied behind Musk's vision, pushing their governments to commit to more aggressive climate targets. At the same time, pressure was mounting on the private sector. Corporations that had initially pledged to support the Green Cities Initiative, but had been dragging their feet, began to feel the heat. The tide of public opinion had shifted. More and more consumers were demanding sustainable products, and businesses that ignored this growing demand risked losing market share. Musk knew this was his moment to drive home the message. The Green Cities Initiative wasn't just a moral cause, it was a business opportunity, a way for corporations to secure their place in the future global economy. But the political resistance still remained. One of the hardest challenges Musk faced was convincing governments in developing countries to prioritize sustainable development over immediate economic needs. Many of these nations were still dealing with the consequences of poverty, lack of infrastructure, and political instability. They had limited resources to invest in ambitious energy projects. Musk understood that, and he knew that simply pushing them to adopt renewable energy technologies wasn't enough. He needed to offer solutions that aligned with their goals and needs. Through collaboration with local governments, Musk's team began developing strategies that offered both immediate and long-term benefits. The Green Cities Initiative started to focus on providing affordable, decentralized energy solutions, solar panels and energy storage systems that could be deployed at the local level. These systems could power homes, schools, hospitals, and small businesses without requiring massive investments in central infrastructure. In many cases, these decentralized energy systems were more cost-effective and resilient than traditional power grids, which were vulnerable to climate-related disruptions. As these projects began to take root in countries like India, Brazil, and Kenya, they started to show tangible results. Local economies were beginning to thrive. Families were able to access reliable electricity, businesses were growing, and educational opportunities were expanding. For the first time in decades, the people in these regions saw a future that wasn't defined by scarcity and struggle but by possibility and growth. The results were nothing short of revolutionary. Yet, despite the successes, there were still obstacles. Political leaders in developed countries, particularly in the United States and parts of Europe, continued to drag their feet. There were entrenched industries and interest groups that were deeply invested in the status quo, and they weren't about to let go of their power without a fight. Musk knew that the battle for global change was far from over, but he also knew that there was hope. The resistance was slowly crumbling. Communities were rising up, taking matters into their own hands. And the pressure from the global youth movement was forcing governments and corporations to act. Musk understood one fundamental truth: change wasn't easy, but it was inevitable. And now, with momentum on his side, he was more determined than ever to lead the charge. The Green Cities initiative had become more than a dream, it had become a movement, and it was no longer just Musk's fight. It was the fight of a generation, a fight that would determine the future of the planet. And in that fight, Musk knew one thing for certain: the world was finally ready to take action. The movement was growing stronger by the day. Grassroots organizations, empowered by local successes, continued to push for sustainable energy solutions in their communities. The message of the Green Cities initiative had become a rallying cry for those who wanted to see the world transition to a new era, one where environmental sustainability, economic prosperity, and social equity were no longer competing priorities but interwoven goals. Yet, despite this wave of momentum, there was one critical barrier that seemed to stand in the way of true progress: political gridlock. In the United States, as well as in Europe and parts of Asia, national governments were struggling to make meaningful progress on climate policy. The divide between progressive factions, which embraced the need for urgent action, and conservative forces, which clung to the status quo of fossil fuel dependence, had never been more pronounced. This was not just a challenge for Elon Musk, it was a challenge for the global movement at large. For all the enthusiasm at the grassroots level, the political elite seemed stuck in place. In the US, the fight over climate policy had reached a fever pitch. The 2024 presidential election was fast approaching, and it was clear that climate change had become one of the most divisive issues on the ballot. Environmental advocates, many of whom had been inspired by Musk's Green Cities initiative, were pushing for bold climate legislation. They wanted to see the government commit to massive investments in renewable energy, carbon-neutral infrastructure, and green jobs. On the other side, there were powerful lobbying groups representing fossil fuel interests who were not about to let go of their grip on the political system. They had decades of influence, billions in campaign donations, and an extensive network of political allies who were determined to preserve the status quo. Musk, who had long been critical of the political system's inertia, was finding himself in the midst of an all-out war for the future of the planet. And this was not just a fight for the United States. In Europe, countries like Germany and the United Kingdom had made significant strides in transitioning to green energy, but many of their neighboring nations, including France and Italy, had yet to commit fully to the same vision. Even within the European Union, which had a strong commitment to climate action, policy decisions were often bogged down by competing national interests and bureaucratic hurdles. In Asia, the situation was even more complicated. China, the world's largest emitter of greenhouse gases, had made headlines by pledging to reach carbon neutrality by 2060. However, its policies were often opaque, and it was unclear whether the country's actions would match its ambitious rhetoric. Meanwhile, other countries in the region, like India and Indonesia, were struggling to balance their rapid economic growth with the need for sustainable development. Musk, frustrated by the political paralysis, decided to take a more direct approach. He knew that, for the Green Cities initiative to succeed on a global scale, he needed to confront the political gridlock head-on. He began working behind the scenes, meeting with key political figures, business leaders, and advocacy groups to find common ground. His strategy was simple: focus on economic incentives, offer practical solutions, and frame the transition to green energy as not only an environmental necessity but also an economic opportunity. The first step was to meet with conservative political leaders who had previously been opposed to climate action. Musk knew that if he could win them over, even partially, it would open the door for broader bipartisan support. His team organized a private meeting with a group of Republican senators in Washington, D.C. These senators had long been skeptical of the Green New Deal and other progressive climate policies. But Musk, ever the pragmatist, wasn't there to lecture them about the science of climate change. He was there to show them how green energy could benefit their constituents, boost local economies, and create jobs, without raising taxes or destroying industries. The meeting was tense at first. Musk's blunt, no-nonsense style often rubbed people the wrong way, but he didn't let that deter him. He laid out his case with his trademark clarity and focus. "I'm not here to argue about the science of climate change," Musk began. "I'm here to talk about the future. The reality is, green energy is going to be the dominant force in the global economy. Those who invest in it now will be the leaders in the coming decades. And those who don't will be left behind. We need to focus on innovation, not regulation. We need to make it easier for American companies to lead the world in solar, wind, and energy storage. We need to create a framework that supports these industries, not a framework that stifles them. There was a moment of silence as the senators processed his words. Musk continued, "We can do this in a way that brings jobs back to America, helps our farmers, and strengthens our national security by reducing our dependence on foreign oil. The Green Cities Initiative is a roadmap for how we can get there. It's not just a lofty goal, it's a blueprint for economic growth." Slowly, the room began to shift. While not all the senators were convinced, some of the more business-minded members of the group started to nod in agreement. They saw the logic in Musk's words. The transition to green energy didn't have to be an ideological battle, it could be framed as a matter of economic competitiveness. The meeting concluded with a tentative agreement to explore ways to incentivize green energy investments. It wasn't a victory yet, but it was a step in the right direction. Over the next few weeks, Musk continued his efforts to break down political barriers. He met with European leaders to discuss how the EU could accelerate its transition to renewable energy while ensuring economic growth. He also reached out to leaders in developing countries, offering to help fund solar energy projects and provide technical expertise. As the pressure mounted from all sides, the political landscape began to change. In the United States, a bipartisan group of senators introduced a climate bill that included many of the provisions Musk had advocated for, including tax incentives for solar power, energy storage, and electric vehicles. While the bill was far from perfect, it represented a breakthrough in a system that had been deadlocked for years. In Europe, several countries announced ambitious new green initiatives, including investments in offshore wind farms, carbon capture technology, and the electrification of public transportation. Even China, despite its reluctance to act in the past, began to accelerate its green policies. The political gridlock was starting to crack. But the battle wasn't over. Musk knew that while these victories were important, they were only the beginning. The real challenge would be ensuring that the political will to address climate change didn't wane once the immediate pressure subsided. He needed to make sure that green energy remained a priority on the global agenda, no matter the political climate. To do this, Musk realized that he had to shift his focus once again. Rather than working solely within political circles, he decided to take the fight directly to the people. He launched a global awareness campaign, using social media, public speeches, and even his own companies to drum up support for sustainable energy. His message was clear: the future of the planet depended on collective action, and everyone had a role to play. The campaign quickly gained traction, especially among young people, who were becoming increasingly disillusioned with the political status quo. They were eager to see real change and were willing to demand it from their leaders. Musk knew that the key to achieving global change lay in the hands of this next generation of activists and leaders. As the campaign gained momentum, Musk continued his work behind the scenes, pushing for stronger policies, larger investments, and more aggressive action on climate change. But now, he was no longer just a businessman pushing for change, he was a symbol of the movement itself, a figurehead for the millions of people around the world who were demanding a sustainable future. It was a difficult and exhausting journey, but Musk knew that the world was finally waking up. And for the first time in his life, he felt the real possibility of change. The great divide between the forces of resistance and progress was beginning to close. And Musk was right in the middle of it, pushing the world toward a future it could no longer ignore. The momentum was undeniable, but the stakes were higher than ever. With the Green Cities Initiative gaining traction across the globe, Musk now found himself at the center of a delicate and volatile political situation. The global response was a patchwork of breakthroughs and backslides, successes that were quickly followed by setbacks, as entrenched interests from every corner of the world rallied to maintain their power. But this was no longer just about politics. It was about survival. The Green Cities initiative had evolved from a lofty ideal to a vital necessity. Around the world, climate impacts were becoming more severe. Hurricanes battered the Caribbean and Southeast Asia, wildfires raged across the American West, and extreme heatwaves scorched Europe. The urgency for action had never been clearer. Yet, even in the face of these escalating disasters, the resistance remained fierce. The fossil fuel industry, though weakened, was far from defeated. Oil executives, whose profits had been tied to the fate of the planet for decades, were not about to let Musk and his supporters dismantle their empires without a fight. In Washington, influential lobbyists continued to sway key senators and members of Congress. In Europe, political leaders from oil-rich nations like Norway and Russia were unwilling to let go of their dependence on fossil fuels. And in Asia, the economic juggernaut of China still clung to its carbon-heavy industries, despite its promises to eventually transition to greener technologies. For Musk, this was the most daunting phase of the battle. His own belief in the power of technology to change the world had never wavered, but the political machinery that stood in his way seemed more insurmountable than ever. He had achieved so much, gathering support from young activists, influencing global corporations, and even shifting the conversation within major political circles. But now, the hardest part of the struggle lay ahead, maintaining the alliance he had forged between progressives and conservatives, and pushing forward with a vision that could overcome the inertia of the status quo. The situation was fragile. One wrong move could splinter the coalition, and with it, the chance for meaningful climate action. The stakes were personal for Musk now. He wasn't just fighting for the future of the planet, he was fighting for his legacy. He couldn't afford to fail. It was in this precarious environment that Musk took one of the boldest steps of his career. He called for a global summit on climate change, a high-level meeting that would bring together heads of state, business leaders, and environmental advocates to form a unified, actionable plan to tackle the climate crisis. This summit would be the culmination of everything he had worked toward. It was time to shift the battle from the halls of Congress and corporate boardrooms to the world stage. The invitation list was exclusive, and the stakes were monumental. World leaders from the United States, China, the European Union, India, and Brazil would be there. CEOs of major multinational corporations, companies that represented the future of energy, transportation, and technology, would attend. The goal was to force a global conversation that left no room for denial or delay. To make sure the summit was a success, Musk brought together an elite team of advisors, including climate scientists, economists, and even negotiators who had experience with high-stakes international diplomacy. He needed every angle covered, every contingency planned for. With months of preparation behind him, the summit was set to take place in a state-of-the-art conference center in Geneva. It would be a historic event, one that would determine whether the world's most powerful leaders could come together to agree on a plan to address the climate crisis, or whether they would remain bogged down in bureaucracy and division. As the summit began, the room buzzed with a palpable sense of anticipation. Musk sat at the head of the table, flanked by representatives of the Green Cities initiative, ready to guide the conversation. But as the world's most powerful figures took their seats, Musk could feel the tension in the air. There were no guarantees. He had been to countless meetings like this before, where grand speeches were made, only for real action to evaporate in the days that followed. It was now or never. The opening speeches were as expected, a mixture of optimism and cautious realism. World leaders spoke about their commitments to address climate change, but they stopped short of providing any concrete plans. Musk, however, was not interested in rhetoric. He wanted action. When his turn came, he rose from his seat and addressed the room with a quiet intensity that captured everyone's attention. "We are no longer at a point where we can afford half measures," he began, his voice steady but firm. "The world is in crisis, and the solutions we're talking about today can't just be ideas for tomorrow, they need to be the plans for today. I'm not here to argue about the science of climate change. We've all seen the evidence. What I'm here to say is this: we have the technology. We have the solutions. Now, it's time to make the political commitment to implement them on a global scale. He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. We're not talking about incremental change. We're talking about a transformation, a fundamental shift in how we power our world, how we build our cities, how we live. We have the opportunity to lead the world into a new economy, one based on sustainability and innovation. But we can't do that if we continue to wait for the next election cycle, the next political crisis, or the next right time. The time is now. Musk's words struck a chord. The room fell silent as world leaders exchanged glances, some clearly uncomfortable with the starkness of his message. But Musk wasn't finished. He leaned forward, his voice growing more resolute. I know that some of you are worried about the political ramifications of making bold climate commitments. I know that some of you are concerned about the immediate costs of transitioning to a green economy. But let me be clear, this is not just an environmental issue. It is an economic one. The longer we wait, the higher the costs will be, both in terms of lives lost and economic damage. If we act now, we can create jobs, reduce poverty, and ensure a more stable and prosperous world for future generations. But we can only do that if we act together. The time for hesitation is over. Let's leave this summit with a concrete action plan, a roadmap for the world to follow. The room was still. The silence was thick, but Musk could feel the weight of the moment. It wasn't just about him or his vision, it was about the future. In that instant, he realized that this summit was not just a place for leaders to hash out policy. It was the moment that would define whether or not the world was truly ready to confront the reality of the climate crisis. As the discussions progressed, something remarkable began to happen. The tension in the room slowly started to lift. There was no single breakthrough moment, no single agreement that made everyone clap their hands in excitement. But slowly, through the course of the meetings, a consensus started to form. Leaders who had once been opposed to major climate action began to recognize that the old ways of doing business were no longer sustainable. Even the most conservative voices in the room began to see the potential for green energy to create new jobs and economic opportunities. By the end of the summit, the world had taken its first significant step toward a global climate agreement. A framework was established, and a timeline was set for the transition to sustainable energy sources. The commitments made during the summit were not perfect, there were still challenges ahead, still political battles to fight, but they were a critical first step. Musk had done it. The Green Cities Initiative had not only survived, it had become the centerpiece of the world's climate agenda. But as he walked out of the summit hall, Musk knew that the real work had just begun. This was just the beginning of a long and difficult journey. But for the first time in years, the world seemed ready to move forward, together. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?